I'm going to start reading my book that I wrote, and it's semi-published on my website about a year ago. Read a little bit of an intro and then start on the main chapters. I'm an Irish woman living at the lowest level of the social spectrum in an industrial town full of medicated people who are so unaware of their real needs that they have become the most apathetic townspeople I have yet to experience anywhere in the world. And I would consider myself reasonably travelled for my age and for my social background and any relative to art, but people generally, the ones who came back at least. Like a lot of people have left art but haven't come back, so they don't count. Unless they come back. I spent my whole life feeling alone in a world full of people. What I've always seen through my eyes has been overwhelmingly sad, and it has honestly been my experience that I am alone on this earth, particularly in times of need and stress. It is maybe this reality that has given me the ability to see a new way, a superior way, a more sustainable way of living, which is within all of our grasps. If only we could all just know it and have access to the knowledge I have gathered and others have gathered from our inner guidance. The way forward will never be found in history books, as nothing tried in our living memory is going to save humanity. As a species, there is no written guidance for us in the past that will be able to sustain humanity on this earth in near future. We are facing complete systemic failure as a civilization. Everything we knew up until now is redundant. All our education, our ways of living recklessly, with motives of greed and self-indulgence at the expenses of others, must be left behind us. All our evils in the world to date have been necessary. Someone has kind of debated that issue, in order to agitate humanity enough to the point of evolving. There is no point in living in contempt for others for what they have been doing to humanity, as it will only serve to further the trenches of pain and hurt. As the difficult illusions fall down around us over the next couple of years or couple of months, it looks like now, we must try as species to be compassionate to those that have basically crucified us in our lifetimes. We have all done things in order to hold on to things we loved and were terrified to lose, and this is simply what a lot of these people have been doing. Others who will be known soon were aware that their actions had higher goals, even though it seemed as if everything they did caused pain and misery. It is this pain and misery that will now lead us into a different level of living, where we as a humanity can have the opportunity to rise above our own pain and see the bigger picture. As a species, we are about to experience true compassion, true awareness, and true sense of higher consciousness, whether we are ready for it or not. Our planet and our universe is evolving constantly, but most of this evolution is so slow that our lives can hardly witness it, only through geological exploration. But as we evolve slowly, there are stages of evolution which seem to take huge leaps. They are actually the end of one and the beginning of another huge stage, and happening extremely quickly at a rate a lot of individuals cannot cope with. This book is about how to survive this evolutionary transition, because it is happening, and if you don't start preparing your mind now, your body will not be able to withstand the planetary and the cosmic realignments that are happening, as I type. I'm sure we have all heard of the Mayan predictions, or at least that something major is happening in 2012. And I'm convinced that we are going to experience something amazing around this time. And it has already started to happen, as these humans have, sorry, I'm just getting some kind of... Yeah, so the Mayan calendar thing, I don't know what it is. Like, I haven't studied ecology or any of that stuff, but just like from my own awareness, I feel that there's so much going on, and even from what I've seen on YouTube and outside my front door, I know there is something going on, so we do need to prepare ourselves for it. Our planet and our universe is evolving constantly, but most of this evolution is slow. It's so slow that our lives can hardly witness it, only through geological exploration. But as we evolve slowly, there are stages of evolution which seem to take huge leaps. They are actually the end of one and the beginning of another stage, and happen extremely quickly at a rate a lot of individuals cannot cope with. This book is about how to survive this evolution, this evolutionary transition, because it is happening, and if you don't start preparing your mind now, your body will not be able to withstand the planetary and cosmic realignments that are happening. I'm sure we have all heard of the Mayan predictions, or at least that something major is happening in 2012. And I am convinced that we are going to experience something amazing around this time, and it is already started to happen, as these things have a long gestation period. There are many cosmic cycles coming to an end and starting again at the same time around the end of 2012. The Mayans talk of a period of darkness, but I don't know what's going to happen. I have been meditating on these changes and to try and figure out what is happening to our mother at this time, and I think it is the core of the planet which is changing. I think that the basically the bulged part is moving, so that would mean like a polar shift and I don't know what else, like, so, and even now, like since I've written this book, like the polar caps have moved dramatically, and you know, there's a lot of changes that seem to say that there's lots of poles rather than two where they should be, where we think they should be. I think that the fat part, or the core, is moving to occupy a different part of the crust, basically, but this is just a guess, which would mean that the equator would encompass different countries, or that the general shape of the earth is losing the equator. Either way, the natural reserves like oil and gas may fall into the hands of different countries. I don't know, it would have definite impact. It would also mean that there would be a lot of seismic activity, and it would also mean that there would need to be a flip or a shift in the polar points. And the magnetic fields to kind of disappear for a while. And then you have the 11-year solar cycle thing. That's kind of, and that seems to be doing something different than it usually or used to do. I don't know. You should check out all these things for yourself. Like, this book isn't about like, it's a suggestion of a possible way how to organise ourselves in case any of this shit happens. I don't know what is going on, but for one, the monetary system is definitely failed. It's gone. History. There's no more people. Too many people know how it's working. It's just, that's gone. Like, forget about it. So what are you going to do with your life when money doesn't buy you everything? You know, humans, the majority of them think that if they have money, they can do anything. And maybe, you know, this to a point is right. This is right. If you have enough money, you can do anything. Now, it doesn't mean that doing anything is ever going to make you happy. Like, what is going to make you happy is inside you, and you can be happy in a shithole, or you can be happy in a mansion, and you can be miserable in both places too, you know. So I think this transition is about finding out who you are, and through finding out who you are and who you love, you will bring love and peace to the planet, because it's inner peace we all seek, you know. People can take away your peace, but they can't give it to you. They can't give it back to you. Like, even if they take away your peace, like I've had my peace taken away when I released this book. 3 days later, the police were here raiding the place, and I've had social workers here, and there's a documentary online all about it with live footage, like, from horrible. But like, they can't, just because they're not here now doesn't mean I have peace now, you know. It's like, you have to find it inside. The people who take it from you can't give it back to you. You have to find it yourself, because you always had it, like, anyway. So, I'm just going to start reading chapter 1. The first subject I tackled was culture, right? The subject of culture, because I'm 37 and living in this town, and there's no, I just grew up thinking there's no culture here, like, and it's only recently I realised that, like, your culture is yourself as well, you know, and we all have a different one. You can have collective cultures, but the one that you're gonna feel at home with most is your own culture once you find it. So, culture. And I got a definition somewhere, I don't know where. The totality of socially transmitted behavioural patterns, arts, beliefs, institutions, and all other products of human work and thought. I often wondered what culture was. Coming from an industrial town on the east coast of Ireland, I always assumed we just didn't have any. I couldn't see any culture except what was in my head. I had all these cultural talents and no use for them. I had aspirations and loved to paint, draw, listen to music, play music, and I even enjoyed singing. But the culture that I witnessed in my town was not for me. There was sport and plenty of it: soccer, Gaelic, rugby, tennis, basketball, athletics, racquetball, squash, swimming. Dancing there for some reason. I keep meaning to take it out. I mean, it can be. We did have dancing, but it wasn't original creative dancing. It was like Irish dancing or like sect stuff, you know. That's not very artistic for me. It's not my kind of art. Golf, pitch and putt, you name it. None of which I had the remotest interest in, and I wasn't prepared even to try to kindle an attraction, but no art. So I just continued in the dullness, assuming all places were like this, and nothing could be done. I endured the social imbalance from my full childhood and young adulthood. I rarely left my town of birth, maybe on a school tour to what I felt were boring places like museums and galleries, and the zoo once, which I might have enjoyed if our teacher hadn't organised us to meet up with these pen pals she had organised for us. I don't bond that easily, and it overshadowed my experience of the zoo and the animals, which I might not have enjoyed. Which might have not have enjoyed actually, as I hate seeing animals in captivity, and the galleries and the museums I still find dull, to be honest. I mean, I think the artists on show in the National Gallery in Ireland are all amazing technical artists. I'm not going to dispute that, but they had to be, as it was the main way of documenting in picture format history. And I just found that if you had seen one great painting of Lord what's-his-name, who ruled over us in whatever year, you've seen them all. For me, art is always about why. Still to this day, there are political exhibitions. Still to this day, there are few political exhibitions. Although I have to admit I am out of touch with the Dublin art scene or any other, actually, as I haven't had the inspiration to make time for it so far. I try to keep to date with periodicals, but that's about it. And it all costs money, that's the main problem. It still seems very snooty to me. The art scene in my own town is still stagnant, even though I have been actively trying to draw awareness to the absolute necessity for an arts venue in the town for 6 years now, more. That's a whole other story. Arklow has culture. It has a culture of industry and the industrial mentality. The drive of politics in town has always been towards job creation at all costs to the inhabitants and the environment, going back as long as anybody in my living memory has told me, and this would include my great-grandfather, who died when I was 9 in 1983, and he was almost 98 when he died. So that gives me a real living historical account of life going back to the year 1885. His career as a sailor was a sailor, and he delivered munitions to other continents which were made in Arklow. Our politicians back then sold us out for the mines which lay beneath our feet. Granted, they weren't even presenting to be our politicians at that time, they were English. first or second generation. It was only around this time generally that English lords and bankers decided that some Irish people should have the right to be given loans by English banks to buy Irish property back from the English banks and lords. Sounds like a rip-off to me. Arklow people of the time were probably just glad to have food after the starvation they had experienced earlier that century, and the bloody rebellion which was lost in the town at the end of the previous century, with the leaders of the rebellion being beheaded, and the leader of the thing being beheaded, and the head reportedly having been kicked down the main street, probably by local eager to have their own lives saved. Gruesome stuff, but fear can do crazy things to the mind. These were times of Cromwell, and anybody with sense, as far as I can imagine, would have made the switch of loyalty, whatever it took to save your life. I suppose I can see why people have inherited the attitude of saying nothing to for fear of rocking the boat to save your life. But I think now it's time to kind of go, right, well, nobody's going to murder me if I admit, that I think that's wrong or whatever, It's not illegal to think, believe it or not, it's not illegal. Your thoughts, well, unless they're of suicide, they're not illegal. So you can actually speak your thoughts. But it's now time to stand up and do something for ourselves. Something for all of us who have experienced a cultural imbalance. We should not be living in a world that lacks light. The arts are the light of our culture. Non-competitive arts are where we can tap into global consciousness and question our individual reality tunnels against others in a collective, safe environment. It must be accepted that anything can be said in the name of art. Another assumption must be that everybody will not appreciate all arts, all different styles. Like, we won't all love it all. But also that there are admirers for all art, Art can be an expression of opinion. It can shine light on taboos or misinformation or injustice, and yet it can make it beautiful. The most evident form of culture I see in Arklow, and indeed in Ireland, is the modern drug culture. The prohibition of most drugs, and some perfectly safe drugs, and the blatant advertisement and promotion of such toxic drugs as alcohol and tobacco, and the pharmaceutical culture where doctors' waiting rooms are some people's lifeline for chat and interaction. The most evident form of culture I see in Arklow, and indeed in Ireland, is modern... just read that, sorry. The cause of this cultural imbalance is global drugs laws. One of the biggest drains on national finances. It's illegal to have the drug that legally you can be addicted to. How does that work exactly? So it's okay to end up with an addiction to heroin as long as you don't get caught with the heroin. Because if you get caught with the drug, you will go to prison, where it will cost us about 120,000 euros a year to feed you and treat you like an animal. a well-treated animal now. I have to say I enjoyed my 7 days in prison. I don't want to go back, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. And like the whole thing, it doesn't solve anything. And not solve any of society's problems, because you will be out in a few months with new addictions and new contacts. The trade and industry that comes from heroin, for example, being illegal is ridiculous. It's definitely not economical in any sense of the word, and for heroin to be illegal, I mean, we could grow heroin here in grow ups or whatever, and give our addicted people white heroin, you know, like that's not gonna make their teeth rot and their skin get all shitty, and they're not gonna die of fucked up stuff in the heroin. And I mean, people live perfectly long and balanced and I'm sure very pleasant lives on white heroin, and they have a function in society too. If it was legal to process, or if it was legal to possess a certain amount of medicinal heroin because you are an addict, a medicinal patient with medical problems related to a medical condition, with no more stigma attached to it than there is attached to being an alcoholic or an addict of antidepressants or doctor prescribed Valium, for example. Here is an extract from a blog on my website in reply to the ex-head of the drug squad talking about his feelings about prohibition. I think the guy is brave enough to be one of the first people to speak out, but I think we have far to go. This was published on November 16, 2010. Extract from the livemic.ie, it says here, but I can't get that website working for some reason, so it's livemicgigs.com. So this is it. My attention has been drawn to the Marion Finucane show, which I would never normally listen to. I avoid talk radio at all costs, and radio in general, as it is pure tool of profit and commercialism driven propaganda. Well, it is propaganda, as is TV, all channels basically. General topics being discussed on talk radio, again any station, are either topical or are smokescreen to hide what is really going on. But they are always fused with the right ingredients to provoke the appropriate response from the listeners, appropriate to the ruling agenda. Only listeners appropriate to the agenda of the broadcast get through to leave a comment. I'm guessing this issue is both topical and smokescreen, as it seems to be pro-cannabis legislation and not completely harsh on heroin decriminalisation. It is only experience which leads me to believe there must be a catch, which is why I think it is a smokescreen for something. Smokescreen for something else. But I don't think it would be wise at this point to refuse the benefit of the doubt, because it was a pretty good show. Like John McGurty is the former head of the Irish Drug Squad, which was established, as far as I can make out from the interview, in the late 70s. Now, when I listen to something, anyway, there might be mistakes on this, sorry, but roughly. From the interview in the late 70s, and John was one of the first officers on the scene, so to speak. This guy claimed that drugs were introduced into Ireland circa 1970. He says it started out with harmless stuff reported from England. He reported some misuse of barbs, but makes little of that detail. In my experience, this is like away from the thing. Misuse of barbs is one of the largest gateway drugs. Gateways that lead generally directly to lifelong opiate dependencies, which of course stems from someone's doctor over-prescribing drugs. Now, it can be from illegally made drugs brought in from other countries too. It was seen as a pimple at first, according to the interview, that might go away by itself with time if it was ignored for long enough. As major hauls of heroin were made over and over again through the years, somehow these seizures got put down to drugs in transit to other countries. So it was like, stupid Paddy's not taking any of this stuff. I once had a very close relationship with someone who became a serious heroin addict. His gateway was these barbs. Well, his first drug was alcohol, given to him by his family at a young age, because that's what people did. That's what men did. They drank alcohol and went to competitive sports events. Women had babies and minded them and didn't complain about hardship. But that was the 70s, and times have moved on. I think this podcast says so much about the substantial transition that Irish culture has come through over the past 40 years, even though we're still in the dark ages. Our collective reality tunnel has been through a sieve so many times that we are basically homogenised at this stage. And in order for this to happen peacefully, which in fairness the past 20 years have been peaceful, we needed to be dosed with sedatives, barbiturates, antidepressants, sleeping tablets, and of course the best anaesthetic of all, alcohol and fluoride, which I've found out since writing this book. Maybe it is better that we were sedated for the last rape, the economic rape of the island of Ireland. What this guy, none of that was in the interview. That's what the book isn't edited yet, and I'd like somebody to edit it for me, but people say they will and they never get back to me. It either means the book is complete and utter shit, or they read it and go, I'm not fucking touching that, but sure, whatever. Or they can't read it at all. What this guy is actually describing is not the history of drugs in Ireland. He is describing the effects of open European borders and the history of prohibition and the enforcement of bullshit laws made up by the underhanded politicians of that time in Ireland to make the Garda's job easier. As we have seen recently, we know where the loyalties of our police force lie with the last student protest, although I do believe reports of orchestrated incidents of violence. This was in London. For whatever, orchestrated incidents of violence for whatever reason. Propaganda, looting, some people just love a riot. To those, I would suggest cage fighting or MMA or a few very heavy joints, better still, and lay off the booze. But you have gatherings of large people. Those in power will implant certain people who will start riots, and then that will attract all the people who just feel like kicking the shit out of someone, or people who are genuinely angry and don't know how, or don't have a platform to kind of voice that discontent. The problem is that the politicians are not working with our interests at heart. They really work for the money. Money in this case comes from foreign investment, pharma and Europe banks and world banks, none of which we actually need, and it seems in return for the pleasure of being raped, tortured, murdered by these institutions, they take our natural resource for the honour, our gas, our forests and natural minerals, airspace, communication, backbone, and so on. And then to top it all off, they kindly distribute the continent's financial debt onto the shoulders of future generations of our people, whilst charging us for the use of our own natural resources. How nice of them. Yeah, so it's just ridiculous. This guy, and none of that was on the interview either, by the way, that's just me going off on a tangent. But the guy on the interview seems to tell the story from the side of the police sergeant, of course, because that was his job, of how they struggled to get certain laws passed over the decades that would give easier passage to catch users of drugs. It became illegal to use heroin or cannabis. Up till then, Ireland just didn't have any issue with exotic drugs or indeed commercialism. He does not seem to accept that alcohol and tobacco are also drugs and were widely used, and alcohol being actually the cause at that time of at least 99% of all drugs-related crime in Ireland. Alcohol still today is the cause of 84% of our accident and emergency visits each weekend here. And a nationally founded site claims that one early sign of problem drinking would be needing a drink first thing in the morning to get going. I mean, that is closer to an early sign of liver failure, mainly like or death, you know. There is also, of course, not a mention of magic mushrooms, which grow wild here and have been traditionally used since there have been both human and mushroom occupying the same space and time. These psychedelics have never caused a death, ever, contrary to their terrifying reputation. For a comfortable ride, simply control your set and setting. Know who is likely to be interacting with you, and if you are not confident or are worried about your trip, take an open-minded friend along with you. And this guy didn't say any of that either. He did say it was the job of the police pre-DPP deputy, I don't know what it is, to go through law books which are Victorian English law, find something relevant and make a charge and decide what the sentence would be in that time. Dennis Mullins, or whatever his name was, handled the first legal drugs charge under the new legislation, and the first person charged was a hippie growing pot in the mountains. I think I know that guy actually, I think I've been up here first. And so I continued for 10 years, so it continued for 10 years by the sound of it, as they completely ignored the thriving heroin trade. So basically they'd spent like 10 years kind of catching people with heroin, but assuming that the locals weren't using the heroin and that it was just in transit through Ireland. While opiates were being brought from England, and heroin. Opiates, like these barbs, they were finding people addicted to them, and that was it really. And this guy, who was the first guy prosecuted for having weed, he then mentions a young girl of 12 or 13 years who had ran away. They brought her home and he overlooked her admitting to having cannabis, and kind of regretted actually interfering at all by the sound of him. So is he saying that kids that young should be allowed to smoke cannabis? I hope so. Cannabis is completely non-toxic and is actually good for the brain, and it improves cognitive development and abstract thought. And the biggest word on it was, oh, you can't smoke it before you're a certain age, but there's no evidence, there's no repeatable evidence to back that up. Kids that age to date, with prohibition the way it is, who've been smoking cannabis, have also been doing E's, they've been drinking, they've been doing all sorts of drugs, because there's no proper education. Parents don't know anything about it. How can you teach your children something you know nothing about? A lot of parents think cannabis and heroin are equally as bad as each other. I'm not saying go out and make your children smoke it, no. But if you know that your child is getting curious about experimenting with his own consciousness, about needing a break from the mundane life that we force our children into, that's why they're rebelling, that's why they're unhappy, because it's a shit life. And it's non-toxic. The reason why kids shouldn't smoke cannabis in school is not because it would have a negative effect on them or their learning. It is because the subjects that they are learning about and the method by which they are being taught is not appropriate for today's modern child adult. The whole system needs restructuring, not just the police system or our laws, the whole lot. You'd have no problem being baked, going into school, if you were doing what you loved all day, if you were doing art, or if that's what you love, or sciences, or because you have to learn 12 times tables, You're not going to learn that on weed. In order to fully prepare our children for the future, we must encourage them to develop the ability to problem solve and think quickly. And believe it or not, problem solving on cannabis is the most natural thing you can do. It's so easy, Contrary to popular misbelief, the use of cannabis is more likely to encourage the ability to think on one's feet rather than inhibit it. Stoners may not be good at remembering where they parked their car or left their keys, but they normally excel at parallel processing and have amazing creative problem-solving abilities. They make excellent organisers, teachers and facilitators. The educational system needs to be more hands-on from an early age, and more emphasis needs to be put on creativity rather than memory and data gathering. We need to value our brightest children and give them special attention and let them study areas of pure interest rather than the common subjects that were useful during the last 200 years. We are reaching a new age of intelligence, and we don't have time to waste bringing slow learners up to speed. These slow learners are not kids with so-called intellectual difficulties, learning difficulties or behavioural difficulties. They are those who insist that society needs time to get used to change. Those who insist that the powers that be won't allow such drastic measures. They are our politicians, our businessmen and our bankers. These are the slow learners, people, not the kids. I know for a fact that if every person in this country was educated rationally about the positive aspects of cannabis and hemp, there would not be a single person, well, you don't know for a fact actually, there would not be a single person who would disagree to its immediate legalization. Well, I don't fucking know actually. Like, I mean, if everybody was educated rationally and sat down, well, if you could do that, I don't think it's possible because we all learn differently. But seriously, the evidence is all there. If there was such a person who, after hearing all the most recent discoveries in relation to the plant, still wanted prohibition, then I would consider that person incapable of making such decisions for themselves, let alone for me. That's how much evidence there is. Money is the only reason any of this is happening, I assure you. Profit, debt, control, money. All connected. Our evolution depends on such changes, and I know exactly how to implement the change in such a way that is pleasant and positive. And if our leaders truly give a shit about us, they would listen now and stop. They would listen now and stop this bullshit. For now, we can all agree that it is safe to legalize cannabis outright, with no strings attached. The only restrictions that should be posed on the growing and selling of this plant is exactly the same as it would be if it were broccoli. Except broccoli isn't as nice. If you make a profit, then you owe tax. If we continue using money, if you choose to continue using money, right? Because I don't think money will last much longer than full utilisation of cannabis and hemp and the decriminalisation of all other drugs, because people don't work for anything else. In my experience, they work to get pissed in this country anyway. It shouldn't matter if you have a criminal record, as it should never have been a crime in the first place. Let all growers grow, let all dealers deal, let all users use. Take away the mask of crime, and all you are left with is business, the business of supply and demand. Cannabis is not only harmless, it is a good thing in all its shapes and forms. It is good for you, good for your child, scientifically studied in detail, good for society, good for humanity, and good for our mothership, the planet. Getting back to the interview, this guy then basically goes on to put the whole heroin problem in Ireland down to a family, the Dunn family in Dublin. He says that there were 7 or 8 of them, and they all ended up involved with drugs. And I would like to know the following: why were the Dunns drawn into a life of criminality? Could it have been anything to do with poverty, lack of option, the easiest option available, lack of direction maybe, abuse, neglect, addiction, social deprivation, social overcrowding, lack of exposure to the arts? I'm not saying that we should all blame the nearest excuse that pops into our minds for murdering people and so on, but we must take environmental issues into account when we think to lay the blame. I don't believe there is anybody to blame in particular, and even if there was, what good is it? What good is it going to do? I know a lot of money was made from a lot of pain, but we certainly do not know the full story, and none of us can point a finger, as I'm sure we have all seen abuse or neglect on the streets of our neighbourhoods and looked the other way. Much more.